Good evening, and thank you for joining us for the Animal Welfare Community Meeting. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about the background information, how we got here, the services that Animal Welfare provides, some statistics as well, and then also addressing our current facility and what a new facility could provide our community, and talk about the site selection process, a little touch on finance portion, and then hearing back from our community. So we'll go through this presentation real quick, and then we would love to have some questions and discussion afterwards. A little background information. A new facility was identified by staff and residents a few years ago as a TIME project. TIME stands for Together Investing in Municipal Excellence. TIME for Stillwater is much like MAPS for OKC. So these needs, not wants, needs, are identified by residents and staff, and then they are brought before the voting population with a proposition for a bond election. We considered this project for a bond election with the Fire Station 2 in 2022, but collectively believed it was best to postpone this potential proposition. We have worked with Brian Thomas, 505 Architects, to work on the facility requirements and provide comparison options just in this preliminary planning stage. There's no place like home. This applies to our residents, animals, and our entire community. Imagine a place where there is no animal welfare. Animals would be left to fend for themselves in the elements with no help against starvation or disease control. And also there would be no animal population control. That would affect our public spaces. We want what is best for our residents, animals, and community. A healthy, beautiful, accommodating facility with the possibility of adding a dog park as well. Animal welfare services. Currently, they provide code enforcement, education, reunification, removal of killed or injured wildlife, and they investigate animal neglect, cruelty, nuisance, and bite cases. All adoptions include spay and neuter, microchip, age-appropriate vaccinations, and internal and external parasite treatment and prevention. I would like to include the differences between animal welfare and the Humane Society is that both help with that population control through spay and neuter. Both also help with adoptions and finding our animals homes, and then also reunification and education. The difference with animal welfare is that they are an extension of the Stillwater Police Department. So therefore, they do the code enforcement and the follow-up on neglect and cruelty cases, bite cases, and they help police with calls for service and other things that we'll talk just a little bit about shortly. Animal Welfare Services in 2023, they had 1,580 intakes. That is 1,029 dogs, 523 cats, and other animals. There were 28 of them. I'd like to note that more than 750 animals were turned away in 23 due to lack of space or the location of the caller. We did have some good adoptions. We had 933 animals adopted. There were 363 animals reunited with their owner. And then Rachel and her staff do their dead level best to make sure that the animals find a home. So whether that is transferring them in-state or out of state or working with the Humane Society. So in-state rescues, that transfer was 116, out of state, 6, and then working with our Humane Society, they transferred 72 animals. Calls for service. So in 2023, our animal welfare responded to 3,732 calls for services. And let's just kind of go through some of these real quick. So they do work with our local vets to pick up or drop off the animals. They did do calls for service with dogs at large when people call in and say, hey, we're seeing a dog in the park in our neighborhood. We are not finding an owner. Then they come and they answer those calls. Extra patrol problem areas, 905. Welfare cruelty checks, 281. Believe it or not, they had 25 livestock calls. Wildlife calls where the animals are still alive was 120, and that's always good news. They assisted police with 13 calls. They had 34 bite cases. They also responded to nuisance or barking complaints, 60 of those. And then they also did welfare checks with injured animals, 11. And then they picked up deceased animals from the roadways and other neighborhoods and those kinds of places, 243. And then they did serve citations, 37 of those. And then there were 480 other calls for services that they responded to as well. Animal welfare staff, they are professionally trained and certified officers. They safeguard the public health and safety while eliminating neglect and abuse of animals. They are community-centered. Therefore, their foundation is education opportunities, consultation, and continued guidance for pet owners. They enforce city ordinances related to animals. Again, this is where they are an extension under the guidance of Stillwater, the police department, and they work under city ordinances, and the officers, the staff must be certified. Our current facility, it is significantly inadequate in size. It lacks appropriate kennel and quarantine spaces and a medical care area. We do not have a medical care area at all. Drainage system is too small and consistently clogs and is difficult to maintain a disinfected sanitary environment. The HVAC system design does not intake clean, fresh air. It is poorly insulated, difficult to heat and cool, and is not energy efficient. Now let's talk about needs. The existing and new facility comparison. So the existing facility, I'd like to go to that top blue arrow there. Our existing facility, we have 26 kennels. Those are for dogs. And we have 19 catteries. Our intake assessment area, we do not have one. If you have been to the animal welfare facility, you will know that when you walk in the front door, right there is the desk. And it's a very, very small space. We do not have an intake assessment area for animals. Enclosed vehicular loading sally port is something that we want to have with a new facility. We do not currently have that. That is a safety piece that is incredibly vital for animal welfare facilities to have, so that once they get to the facility, the animals, when they're unloading them, they don't run off and that kind of thing. So, but let's go through comparison of these, okay? So an existing kennel right now at the facility, with the new facility, that kennel space would be double in size. So whereas you're seeing that new facility, there's 44 to 59. In a time of crisis, that would actually be 88 to 118. One singular kennel space at the new facility is almost double the size of an existing kennel space that we have right now. But there will be dividers built in at the new facility. So as I said, in a time of crisis, we could go from 44 kennel spaces to 88. Then also with the catteries, we've got 19 at a new facility. We would have 30 to 32. We would have an intake assessment area at the new facility. We would also have a sally port. Some other things, just as you're looking back through this later, and I'm not going to go through every line by line, but a utility janitor closet. As you know, if you have an animal of your own, imagine having all of the animals that we have there. It is definitely important to have a utility janitor area. Right now, if you've been to the existing facility, you know that we really don't have workspaces or workrooms. That's just not possible. So when you walk in, we have the desk right there, and our staff, we're so appreciative that they do their absolute best with the current space. An outdoor storage, we do have that, and we will have a larger one there. A conference employee break room, that would be nice to have. A community room, I really want to touch on that. So a community room, many animal welfares are adding that feature, because what that does is you have volunteers, Girl Scout, Boy Scout, all of these different troops that come and volunteer, and we love that. But this would provide them a space to utilize for that. Our other volunteers, also, I do want to say this for our volunteers, with a new facility, they would have lockers. They could put their stuff up, it would be safe and secure, and we do not at all have that now. We barely have space for our staff. But that community room could also be for education purposes. We would highly encourage OSU Vet Med to utilize that anytime. There's just so many opportunities for growth there. So let's go back up a little bit to talk about the public parking spaces. Right now, we only have 6. Staff parking, we have 4. And you can see that those numbers double and triple right there. We would like to add a dog park. Right now, we currently have 1 dog park within the city of Stillwater, and this would be an opportunity to add another. And we'll get to that site in just a couple minutes here and talk about that. So the amount considered has been $6.75 million. Now that has been estimated with a previous location that we were reviewing, and there were trees that needed to be removed and excavating services that needed to be done. With the space that we're leaning into now, that would not be the case. We do not need to do tree removal and that kind of thing. However, 505 Architects has advised that the previous amount may need to be increased to 7.1 with anticipated 5% inflation. But we're gonna reassess all of the financial pieces to this and work with our bond advisors and our financial leadership and just start from ground zero on that and truly find the accurate number that we would need. I do want to remind you that a bond amount, if passed, that does determine specs, location, dog park, and potential future expansion. Now we're going to talk about location, and I'm going to have Bill Millis with engineering share with us how we have determined a potential new location for our animal welfare facility.
Thanks, Dawn. As Dawn said, I'm Bill Millis, and I'd like to walk us through how we evaluated the possible locations for the facility. So here we have, this is the current location on South Main Street. You're probably most all familiar with that. And it looks like a fairly big site, but you see there by the blue that most of the site is in the floodplain. So there's not that much of the site that is developable. The actual usable land is pretty small, which would limit the size for this facility, and also limit any potential future expansion of the fire department site, which is just to the north. So the principal tool we used, our GIS system, which is very powerful because you can filter it for different things. When you're looking for specifics about a site, you can overlay things like utilities and see how close they are. GIS, as an aside, is publicly available on our website, stillwaterok.gov. And you can just learn a lot about, look at your house, look at the various places around town, and you can learn about it through the GIS. But what we did was query the GIS, and it identified 132 city-owned properties in Payne County, so not just within city limits. You can see on our note there that the Payne County tells us we have 144 sites. So that discrepancy, we identified the other 12 and applied the same criteria that I'll talk about to narrow it down from 144 sites to find out how many are really suitable for this type of facility. And that's what we'll go through that process. So we did evaluate all 144. You can see there that some of them are outside the city. So that was the first map showing all 144. So the first screening was looking for sites that were at least 2.5 acres. That's the site that the architect tells us we need for this facility, for the building, the potential dog park, the parking, and all those sort of things. That filter brought us down immediately to 47 properties remaining. And I'll add that we also manually looked at, what if a site was 2.4 acres or just over 2, but might be suitable. So we looked at those as well, and all those sites ended up being screened out. So that's the first filter. Second thing we filtered out was city parks with restrictions. Now that could be a deed restriction from when the park was established. Maybe it was a donation, and the donator said it can only be used for outdoor public recreation. So then this use would not be allowed on that. So that was a screening criteria. Or state or federal regulations based on funding that the park has received. That brought us down from 47 to 26. The next screen was for properties that are currently in use. So you can see, for example, at the bottom right, the large property there, that's the wastewater plant. This screening tool took out properties like that, or City Hall, or this facility. The next map, we excluded properties that were in the floodplain or in detention areas. There are a couple of city-owned properties, for example, that are regional detention facilities, and obviously that's not suitable for animal welfare facility use. So that leaves us with three remaining properties. The final, and these are the three, by chance, they're all pretty close together and fit on one map. Wanted to show you these three sites and talk about the final filter that we applied. Basically that you can see that sites 1 and 3 are both right next to a neighborhood. And based on our experience here, this is the only screening filter we used that you could consider essentially subjective, and that was to not select a site that was adjacent to a neighborhood. So that brings us down to one site. And that this is at the airport. We'll zoom in on it so you can get a better look at it. But what I wanted to mention here was normally you do this kind of screening criteria and you come down and you end up with a short list. You'd hope for 3 to 5 or 6 sites, and then you can use your more subjective criteria like how much earthwork you have to do, how much tree clearing, maybe how accessible utilities are, and use those semi-subjective things to weigh the sites and rank them. In this case, I would say the filters excluded everything, essentially. So we end up with one remaining site. And this is it. It is adjacent to the waste management facility, if you're familiar with that. Kind of the southeast corner of the main airport complex. That's Sanborn Lake in the upper right, if that helps for reference. Some aspects of this site, it's very near the new airplane that OSU uses for education facilities, the new Ray and Linda Booker Flight Center. It's about a mile from the new Fire Station 2 under construction. The fact that it's close to Sanborn Lake could be a future amenity. Then perhaps there's a trail connection to the Sanborn Trail where a person could, when they have the meet and greet, could check out a dog and take it for a walk around the lake or to the lake. Other aspects of being near an airport, could that be a detriment or a benefit to the site? Rachel contacted other facilities that are near airports and didn't get any negative feedback. Definitely received some positive feedback that they're less isolated. They're near other facilities, so there's kind of a little bit of built-in security for vandalism or whatever on the weekend when people aren't around. Maybe some more traffic there, so people would be aware of it because everybody's driven by the airport. So you've seen the animal facility. So when you're thinking of adopting an animal, the location might come to mind. This is just to show what the future could look like for this site. Here we've superimposed utilities, so water and sewer are readily available. That road is the alignment for Hargis Road, which the city plans to reconstruct in the near future. And the phase 1 of that Hargis Road will replace the airport access road from Lakeview and Western up to right where it says Airport Industrial Access Road. About there is where the phase 1 will end for Hargis Road. And then phase 2 will continue on up to Airport Road itself. That shading may be hard to see, but the light shading is where the site would be developed now. And then behind that below and to the right is future expansion possible area. So there is room for growth on the site. It is at the airport, but this area is considered, I'm probably not going to get the terminology right, but non-avionics uses are allowed, just like waste management is there. So it's appropriate for the use under FAA guidelines. That won't create any issues there. If you've been following the history of the Hargis Road project, you may have heard there are funding issues related to the ball fields in the park area. And the LWCF, it's Land and Water Conservation Fund. So that's federal and state limitations that we're working through. But we confirm that those boundaries do not impact the animal welfare site. And here, just for reference, kind of closing out how we arrived at the best site, there's an existing site on the bottom of that drawing and the Hargis Road site up by the airport.
Thank you, Bill, for sharing that information regarding our site selection process. I do want to include and just reemphasize that we started from ground zero on that site selection process and really dug in with a thorough investigation of the 132 properties. And we appreciate engineering and IT for doing that and for leading that for us. Regarding finance, as I mentioned earlier, Christy Cluck, our Assistant City Manager and Director of Finance here, is going to lead the way for us to reassess our finance component of that. And we'll work with our city attorney, Kimberly Carnley, and then also our bond advisors and our financial leadership to really dig in and see, is the 6.75 what we will need for this property, for a new facility? Or does it need to be decreased a little bit or increased? We just want to pinpoint it as much as we possibly can. And we all know with the economy right now and inflation, it is hard to do that, but we are going to do our dead level best to get there. So let's just talk about some scenarios. Right now, for a property that, let's say you have a home for approximately $200,000, if we were to go forward with a bond and our voting community were to pass that, and we were to go with a $6.75 million bond, and let's say the term length was 10 years, because that is the max that we would go with this bond. We could go 5, 7, or 10. But let's say that we went with the 6.75 for 10 years. If you owned a $200,000 property, that means that your annual increase would be around $55. And that monthly increase would be about $4.64, but that would be equivalent to approximately 25 cents a day. So, and that would be for 10 years. Let's talk about a general obligation bond that we recently passed. The last one that we passed was in April 2022, and it was the Fire Station 2. Now, that bond amount was $9 million, and that's for 20 years. I want to emphasize that this is currently the only item, the only bond proposition that property tax is collected for by the city. So if there's another bond proposition by another entity, such as Stillwater Public Schools, that is not this bond. So the city, I just hope that people will understand the difference between all of our different infrastructure and entities regarding those bond elections. And it can get confusing sometimes. So the last one we passed was the Fire Station 2, and that is being under construction right now up there on Western. So just to give you another comparison regarding how it would affect my home. So again, back to a $200,000 property, that increase that homeowners are paying right now for Fire Station 2 is approximately $32.90 a year. Again, now, if we were to pass, our voting population were to support a $6.75 million bond for 10 years for the animal welfare facility, they're already paying $32.90 a year. The increase would be $55.63 a year for the animal welfare. So a total for 10 years would be $88.53 a year. Now, after 10 years, that would fall off and it would go back to the $32.90 for that Fire Station 2. Again, I just want to remind you, we are totally going through finance piece again to make sure that these numbers are where we feel is best to present to our voters for their consideration. And if I might add, right now, we're just collecting information from our community. And then we are going to share that information with our mayor and council. We plan to do that in mid-April to get feedback from them and to share your feedback with them. And then we'll go from there. We are not at the point of putting it on a bond or on a proposition yet for a bond election, but we are doing as much gathering of information as that we can so that our mayor and council have what is needed to make the best decision possible. Okay, so at this time, I think it would be good for us to go ahead and take some questions if anyone has them. I do want to share with you that this information and additional information is available at stillwaterok.gov/time and stillwaterok.gov/animal welfare. Also, if you have information to add that you think about later or questions that may arise, please do not hesitate to email me at Dawn, DAWN.Dodson, DODSON, @stillwaterok.gov.